It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Unhappy Hour live sports radio show on thenewamericanmedia.com. Here is your host, Brian Engelman.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you very much for joining us on the Unhappy Hour. A lot of stuff going on in the world of sports. We'll dive right in. We are pleased to be joined with our special guest co-host, Zak Baris. Zak, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. How about you?
Living the dream, as always. Just following the world of Cleveland sports. I don't know. Zak, where do you want to start off? Let me ask you this. I know you're an NBA guy, so is it obvious that you're way more wrapped up in the NBA playoffs right now than anything else?
Honestly, quite frankly, I'm kind of disappointed in the NBA playoffs, to tell you the truth so far.
Okay.
But I'm willing to talk Indians first, whatever the hot topic is right now.
Well, okay. Well, you know what the hot topic for me is. Why are you disappointed in the NBA playoffs so far? Because that's interesting to me. Because why don't you set up, though, by the way, for everyone listening, who you are and you know what you do for your job, because basketball is part of you, and you're still kind of disappointed in the playoffs. So introduce yourself, if you will.
I'm Zak Baris. I currently work as a scout with the NBA. I work with an agency. You can find me on Twitter at ZBaris, Z-B-A-R-I-S. I currently evaluate high school and college talent, and I'm always on the road, so I get to see a lot of the college players, a lot of the top-notch talent, and high schoolers. So it's, I do what I love, and and basketball really it's a great sport. I'm just disappointed with the NBA playoffs so far.
Okay, in which way?
I'll get started with the Chicago-Philly series. Derrick Rose tearing his ACL in Game 1 was a huge letdown in the Eastern Conference. Miami really now has the easiest road to the title of anyone. I mean, the Pacers could take that series into 6 or 7 games, but I don't think it's going to be too much trouble for them to win it. As long as they can contain Roy Hibbert, I think Miami will do well. But the first series of Miami and the Knicks wasn't even a challenge for the Heat. They blew away the Knicks. And the Knicks have a ton of talent, but they just didn't put together a proper team. They went for talent rather than pieces that fit. And that's why the Knicks aren't doing so well. They'll never be better than a 7th or 8th seed in the East with the current roster they have in place. So Miami won that series. Then you have Chicago and Philly. Derrick Rose obviously tore his ACL in Game 1, which was the end of it for the Bulls, kind of. And then Joakim Noah goes out with the ankle injury. Chicago then basically, the series was over by that then. In Philadelphia, who's a very mediocre team, nobody on their team averaged more than 15 points a game this season. They didn't have a lead scorer. Now we have an 8th seed in the second round. Luckily, Boston beat Atlanta, so we don't have to see an Atlanta 76ers series. But again, Boston's an aging team. They should probably handle Philly within 4 or 5 games, in my opinion. And I just feel that the playoffs though aren't as exciting as they were a few years ago. You don't have the matchups like Cleveland and Boston or Cleveland and Orlando. A lot of the teams that were fun to watch a few years ago just aren't what they were. The Celtics aren't what they were, 2 to 3 years ago. The Magic aren't what they were 2 to 3 years ago in the East, and there are a lot of great rivalries. Detroit's not in it anymore. It's just the East doesn't have a lot. The East had 2 powerhouses in it this year, Miami and Chicago. Chicago lost in round 1. Miami's still there. I'd be very surprised if Miami doesn't make it to the title.
Well, let's not forget about how great the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Wizards series were. Those were some very chippy, dicey, aggressive series. Things that you're like, oh, here we go. This team, you'd always look at Washington and go, they're not going to beat us, but man, they might hurt us. Because it was one of those very aggressive series. I kind of know what you're saying. It's a lot of blase matchups so far.
Washington was putting good teams on the floor. With Gilbert Arenas and Antoine Jamison, they were constantly competitive. And they were getting close. Every year. Those were fun series to watch. Then you have the Cavs rivalry for a couple of years with Detroit, which were great series. And then the Cavs in Boston, a couple of years in a row, those were fantastic series. And even the Cavs Magic, they failed to win, but they were still great series, though. All the games were really close. You didn't see any blowouts in the series, which was nice. For the most part, there were a couple blowouts here and there, but all the games were relatively close and they were fun to watch. The East now is everybody's been talking about these 90s rivalries that are all back, Heat, Knicks. The Pacers are back in it, but none of these teams are that exciting. None of them have a ton of talent because all the superstars seem to be in one city nowadays, and it's just not creating a great atmosphere for the playoffs. I think the Western Conference playoffs are a lot more exciting. Denver and LA are locked in a battle right now. And frankly, with the way Denver played last night, they have a good chance to win Game 7 if they can shut down Gasol again.
Okay, I want to get to the Nuggets and I want to get to the Lakers because obviously we're living out here and watching all that in the greater Los Angeles area. But I want to get to Chris, the Birdman, whatever's going on there. But before we do, I want to get back to tearing his ACL with Derrick Rose. I have the same exact feeling you do, that, this was supposed to be probably the Bulls versus the Heat to come out of the East. And now the best team with the reigning MVP, when he goes down, it just feels like... Look, I'm still a guy that roots against LeBron James. I root for him to lose. I will only be happy in this NBA playoff season once the Heat lose. And I'm a little apprehensive, not sure how that's going to turn out now that Chicago bowed out with Derrick Rose being hurt. Is that kind of the crux? Because you're also a huge Cleveland fan like myself.
I'm not. Here's the thing. In my job, I look at the NBA as a business. I think LeBron made a terrible business decision by going to Miami. I don't necessarily... I don't like the Heat as a team personally. I root against the Heat. I'm not going to lie about that. I do root against them, but personally, I don't have a personal vendetta against LeBron James anymore. Last year I was very angry with him for leaving. This year it is what it is. I've moved on. The Cavaliers got Kyrie Irving and Tristan Thompson out of it. They're rebuilding. If the Cavaliers wind up with another top pick, we'll get to that later. But I've been able to move on from LeBron James. I am. I don't like. He's a fantastic player. I don't like what he did. But I still have fun watching the Heat. I enjoy watching them lose. I do. I would love it if the Celtics beat them in the Eastern Conference Finals because I doubt Indiana can beat them. And it just took everything out of me when I watched Derrick Rose go down in the last minute of Game 1, and when they're up by 12 points or whatever they were up by. And I knew as soon as he planted and his knee buckled, I was like, that's a torn ACL. Like, I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, the Bulls are done. They have no chance to beat the Heat now. And it was over from there. I think the Heat quietly were thrilled at what happened to Derrick Rose because, it made their road that much easier.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I still think they're going to have major, major trouble if they get to the finals and they have to face a team like Oklahoma City or San Antonio. I think both teams will beat them within 6 games. I don't think they can contain either team.
Okay, so you're obviously saying the Western Conference is the strongest conference in the NBA this year.
I think there's 2 very strong teams coming out of the West in Oklahoma City and San Antonio. The Lakers, I don't think the Lakers have the bench to be able to make it to succeed after the past. To be able to beat Oklahoma City. They can't match Oklahoma City's production off the bench with guys like James Harden and, even Derek Fisher's performing very well for them off the bench too. And I just don't think they can match the production. That's the problem with LA. Jordan Hill's playing very well for them right now, but it's, Gasol, he doesn't do well against physical defenders. And look what happened to him with Kevin Farid on him last night, and JaVale McGee. They just, they shut him down. He put up 3 points and 3 rebounds last night on 1 of 10 shooting. It was one of the most miserable performances I've ever seen by an all-star power forward. So that's something Chris Bosh would do sometimes, because Bosh is a soft, power forward. He's more of a finesse player, and that's what happened. And Gasol, I would be very worried if I were a Laker fan right now watching how Gasol does it. They don't have a chance to win because Kobe Bryant shot lights out last night, and they still got blown away. That's one of the things that's one of the deciding factors in the series. Even if Kobe performs well, if Gasol can't do anything and Andrew Bynum can't do anything, LA won't have a chance. They need Bynum and Gasol to be at 100% and be physical. Otherwise they don't have a chance to win tomorrow night, which is a major problem.
Is Meta World Peace going to make a difference?
I think he will. It depends who they play him on. Ramon Sessions had a lot of problems with Ty Lawson in the series. Ty Lawson had a fantastic night shooting last night. I believe he was over 60% too. And that's going to be another problem. If they might have to ship World Peace over to be guarding Lawson or Andre Miller in the series because they've had a lot of problems stopping the guards for Denver. It didn't look like a problem earlier in the series. It's looking like a major problem now. But I think getting World Peace back, anyways, it'll provide extra depth for their bench so Ebanks can come off the bench. personally, I don't understand Mike Brown's infatuation with playing Steve Blake. Steve Blake is completely useless in this situation. You know, he throws up bricks. He shoots a lot of three-pointers. Can't make any of them. He plays terrible defense. They're better with Christian Ienga in there than they are with Steve Blake.
Oh, Christian Ienga. I haven't thought his name in a while.
He's a good defender. Christian Ienga is a good defender, a high motor player with a lot of athleticism. He's just very raw.
Didn't we even? Where's he at? Is he still in the Cavs organization?
He's on the Lakers.
There we go. Yeah, he was.
He was involved in the Ramon Sessions trade.
I was going to say, I haven't thought of him in so long. I knew he was gone, but I forgot he was part of the Lakers deal. What do you think? What do you think Mike Brown has run into over here? You have an aging Kobe Bryant. You have a team of, Bynum can have 30 rebounds one night and not show up the next night. What do you think Mike Brown stands a chance in L.A.?
I think he does. I mean, look what happened with them last year with Phil Jackson. I mean, he got swept in the second round last year, I believe, or I think they got swept. I doubt. And this year they don't have Lamar Odom. Kobe's a year older. Gasol's a year older. And it's all these guys, and Bynum's not showing up. It's not his fault whether they're not winning. They had a very good regular season, considering they lacked a bench all season. They're not one of the deeper teams in the league. They've been very fortunate to get Jordan Hill's play off the bench. He's been fantastic for them since Brown put him in the rotation. But like I said, they just don't have they don't have a good bench. Next year they're probably going to suffer too. And then the following year they'll be okay because they literally right now they don't have one contract on the table right now for the 2013-2014 season.
Wow.
Everyone's an expiring deal. Obviously they'll pick up Bynum's option and they'll probably re-sign. I'd be shocked if they didn't re-sign Kobe. But after that, they can start building a younger team around them again, is what they're going to do, what Jim Buss and Mike Kupchak are going to have to do, or Mitch Kupchak. That's what they're going to have to do.
Okay, so who do you see coming out of both conferences? I know we talked about Chicago going down, so that one is gone. We talked about the Celtics and the Heat. Let's say, what are the three strongest teams in the East in order? Who do you see as number 1, number 2, number 3 left in the East?
I think Miami's the strongest team just because of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, but like I said, if they don't get production out of the point guard position in the center, they're going to be in trouble. They need to be able to stop Roy Hibbert. Indiana's not a cakewalk in the East. They're not by any means an easy team to beat. They're a very good team. They won over 40 games this year. I think I would go with the best team I would put right now is the Miami Heat in the East. Second best, just because of the experience and they're healthy right now, are the Boston Celtics. I think the Celtics will beat Philly in probably 4 to 5 games. I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't. And I would say Miami's they're the third best team, and I think Philly's a long shot at 4th.
Gotcha. And what about in the West? We were talking about that you think Oklahoma City and the Spurs can both beat the Miami Heat. So obviously, you said the Western Conference is stronger. Who would you say are the 3 strongest teams in the West in order?
In the West right now, I'd put the strongest team is it's either the Spurs or the Thunder. It's 1 and 1A with them. It could go either or, but I'm going to go with San Antonio. I'm going to go with my gut and say San Antonio because they're healthy right now. And like I said, San Antonio made a great trade at the deadline by getting Steven Jackson. Or I believe they may have just picked him up at the waiver wire because I know he was traded. And he's been fantastic for them. They've just gotten production out of so many guys off their bench. Their starting lineup, is performing well. Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, all these guys are performing well on their bench. They have legitimate scoring options off their bench in Ginobili, Steven Jackson. So I would go with San Antonio number 1 because they just have so much depth and they can score at any point of the game nowadays. It's something they didn't have a few years ago. And Oklahoma City I'd put number 2. You can't go wrong with Durant, Harden and Westbrook, and they still have Ibaka and Perkins. They're a very solid team. And then 3, it's tough to say. I would say the winner of the Clippers-Grizzlies series would be number 3. I think they're both teams are very solid teams, and I think Memphis is another team that could even give Miami a run for their money because they match up well against them. Gasol and Randolph would give the Heat a lot of trouble in the East. They're going to give anyone a lot of trouble. I've been surprised that LA's up 3-2 in the series. But, if, like I said, if Memphis wins Game 6, there's a good chance they'll be able. There's a good chance they'll win the series if they win Game 6.
We're talking live. We're talking live with NBA scout Zak Baris and Cleveland sports fan Zak Baris. You're talking about that series. Memphis has looked pretty good, and you look at an injured Clippers team where Chris Paul's hobbling, and you look at Blake Griffin kind of not at 100% health. What do you see
Phillips
happening?
And Butler are both out for
That's right.
out.
Yeah,
So it's a rough go for the Clippers. I mean, I think they're both good teams. I think both at this point they're looking at those. Whoever wins that series will be the third best team in the West going into this. Even if the Lakers prevail, I still think that having the Lakers having to face, I believe they're facing Oklahoma City in the next round if they win. The winner of the series does. I think Oklahoma City will beat them or the Nuggets in 4 or 5 games. I think Oklahoma City is just too young. They're too fast for the Lakers. And, whether LA wins the series or not, it doesn't matter because either one of these teams will be eliminated quickly in the second round.
Okay, and you were saying that Oklahoma City might not. You would give the edge to the Spurs. Would you say it's because they're young, the thing that gives them legs and gives them the endurance that can knock the Lakers out?
I think the Spurs are just so deep, and Popovich is the best coach in the NBA. I don't even think it's close. I think Popovich is by far the best coach in the NBA. He's done such a fantastic job with this team this year. They're completely rebuilt on young talent now. You've got like DeJuan Blair, Danny Green, who was a Cavaliers reject, who's been unbelievable for them. And like I said, getting Steven Jackson and them just being healthy finally. The Spurs are a tough team to beat. I mean, if you look at their plus minus ratio over the past, I think it was 13 games to end the season, including the playoffs. Every single one of them was a double-digit win. They average their average victory was I think plus 17 or plus 18. Literally, they're not just victories; they're blowout victories, and they're just playing so well right now, and they're so well coached. And like I said, if San Antonio, they won a 4-game series with Utah right away. They're healthy and they're well rested. I think that's the key for San Antonio is being well rested.
Well, they're an old team. Their legs start getting creaky this time of year. And they are. They've had the time, and they're saying that Oklahoma City, it's going to hurt them having so much time off in between series. Do you buy into that, or do you tend to agree?
No, not really. I mean, if teams are practicing every day, they'll be fine. I think the grind of an NBA game, though, in the playoffs is just so grueling and so intense. Players are playing a lot harder. The fouls are a lot harder. I'd rather be well rested going into the playoffs. I think it's a lot better to be well rested.
Well, Byron Scott is pretty well rested because the Cavs are not participating in the postseason. How would you rate his season with the Cavs this year, with everything they went through with the injuries they had a few people go down, and they were a borderline number 8, number 7 playoff seed before Varejao gets hurt. How do you think Byron Scott did?
You'll be surprised with the grade again. I'm going to give him an A-, and I'll tell you why. I think because, like I said, before the Irving injury, that team was, like you said, was in the playoffs. They were a playoff team. They were with a healthy Varejao, with Sessions on the team and a healthy Irving. That team was the 7th to 8th best team in the East. And when Varejao went down, they went on a little skid here and there. They weren't playing great basketball, and then Irving went down, and then Sessions got traded. But like I said, they were playing good basketball up until then. Luckily, I hate to say it, but luckily the injuries were actually good for the Cavs. We won't be picking worse than 6 in the lottery this year, and they could be picking number 1 if they have the chance to land Anthony Davis. It'll be well worth it. I didn't want to see the Cavs in the playoffs. Imagine if we were the 7th seed and had to face the Heat in the first round. That would have been miserable.
Yeah, but you know what? I actually wanted that. I actually wanted to see that.
Watching LeBron come in there and bounce the Cavs in 4 games would have been miserable.
I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that you're making a solid point, but I still wanted the chance to get out there and take a few swings and see what you can do and just – I don't know. LeBron's the type of player where you can get inside of his head. Something obviously cracks with this guy under pressure.
He would have been fired up though playing Cleveland, back in his home arena. That's the arena that started all. I guarantee where he never lost at home, or very rarely lost at home. I'm telling you right now, those games probably would have been 30 and 35-point blowouts at that point. The Cavaliers, like I said, it's better to be bad for a few years than be great a few years later, rather than being mediocre. For a long time. And the Cavaliers, I think the Cavaliers were a little worried about that during the season too, because I think Chris Grant looked at it and he goes, "My team's developing too fast." I think he honestly looked at that and said that. That was the problem. The Cavaliers would have been stuck in mediocrity for a long time had they made the playoffs this year. Well, because they wouldn't have had the high pick.
Right. Well, in the NBA, you can get locked into being a mediocre team for 20 years because you're always the number 7, number 8 team. but you're not doing anything great to drastically improve yourself. So you're good enough to not be terrible, but not terrible enough to rebuild to the point where you can start competing again. So if the Cavs don't pick any lower than number 6, let's say they're at 6, who do you think will be available at 6, and who would you take?
If Harrison Barnes is sitting there at 6, I take Harrison Barnes.
Now I've heard some people. I've heard some people in Plain Dealer kind of looking at Harrison Barnes, saying there was a lot of hype. He kind of crumbled when it counted, and we haven't seen enough to really. We shouldn't pick him that high. What would your response be to that argument?
I was going to say, if the Cavaliers didn't have a legitimate point guard, I would say don't take Harrison Barnes. But the Cavaliers do have a great point guard in Irving who can get him the ball. That's the thing. Harrison Barnes can't create his own shot off the dribble. He's not that kind of player everyone thought he was going to be in college. He wasn't. He needed Kendall Marshall to set him up. That's why he had such a bad NCAA tournament this year. North Carolina was knocked out in the second round by OU. You have to look at that and you say, okay, Harrison Barnes could be a legitimate player with a great point guard. Kyrie Irving is that. The Cavaliers need a wing. It's a perfect fit if they, it's 6. If the Cavaliers are drafting 1, 2, or 3, my opinion, if it's 1, if you land Anthony Davis, Cleveland should be rejoicing if they land Anthony Davis because he brings legitimate superstar defensive talent right in his first year out of college. He could pair up and make a great front court with Thompson and Varejao. I'm talking unbelievable front court defensively. And the Cavaliers, they would probably be a playoff team next year if they're able to land Anthony Davis. Mark my words on that one. I bet you they could be a decent playoff team next year, probably a 6th seed in the East, if they land Davis.
And at number 2?
At number 2, there's Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and Brad Beal. Kidd-Gilchrist, the small forward from Kentucky, high motor player, great defensively, and great around the rim. If there's anything around the rim, he's going to put it in. That's the nice thing about him. He still needs to develop a jump shot, and his offensive game still needs a little work. But I think he could develop within 2 to 3 years. He could be a legitimate all-star on the wing. Brad Beal is a shooting guard, he reminds me a lot of Ray Allen. He's 6'5". You can't pay attention to the college numbers. He wasn't a good fit in the system at Florida. Scouts have already been saying he's a much better fit in the NBA than he was as a college player. The game has transitioned in the NBA. It's a totally different game. He could be another great fit. The one player I really don't like for the Cavaliers is Andre Drummond. I'm not a fan at all. I've watched him play multiple times this season. He's the one player that worries me in this draft. Yes, he could be the next Dwight Howard, but he could also be the next Kwame Brown, and I think that's more likely. At number 4, you're picking a guy who is going to have a lot of talent. You're not picking, that's what the later part of the lottery is for, is picking guys based on potential rather than production. And Andre Drummond averaged around 10 points a game last year, maybe even lower than that, and less than 10 rebounds a game. I could understand if he was averaging less than 10 points a game and he was putting up 14 to 15 rebounds like Anthony Davis was. I would say take Drummond. He's a great defensive player, but nothing about his game impressed me last year. Other than a couple games, he showed great potential. Other games, he wasn't even on the floor. He didn't show up. You would have never even heard his name called. And that's what bothers me about Drummond. I'd rather take the sure thing at that point and try to build. Because the Cavaliers, if they were to select Brad Beal or Michael Kidd-Gilchrist or Davis, you can still go out there on the market this summer and sign a guy like Omar Ashik, from the Chicago Bulls as a center. It would give the Cavaliers a really powerful front court if they could add Ashik to the mix, and have Davis. They could have Davis. Davis is more of a 4, but Davis could play the 3 too. He's athletic enough to defend a guy like LeBron and Kevin Durant. He is 6'11", but he's great off the dribble, and he can really play anywhere from the 3, 4, or the 5. And that's what's great about Davis. And if you have a front court starting of, Omar Ashik at center, Tristan Thompson at power forward, and Anthony Davis at the 3, and then have Varejao as a high motor player coming off the bench playing the 4 or 5 because that's where he belongs. On a good team coming off the bench, he's always a high energy player. The Cavaliers would be a very good team next year, and they'd be tough to beat.
And if you're the Cavs front office, then obviously that would be your draft strategy going in, whether you pick 1 or somewhere down to 6. Are there any other moves you would try to make in the front office? Are there any contracts you're trying to unload? Do you re-sign Antoine Jamison? And are you confused as to why we didn't dump Jamison at the trade deadline for someone looking to shed salary since his contract was expiring? Was there any interest in that, or do you think they dropped the ball? Or they
I don't think there was any interest at all. I think the Houston Rockets were the only team that showed mild interest in Antoine Jamison. here's the thing with the Killers. They're going to have so much cap room in a couple years. They don't want to be cap strapped anymore. They want to be able to have the room in a few years to be able to re-sign their own players and go out and make some smart free agent signings. Being in a market like Cleveland, they know the only superstar they'll ever be able to land again in free agency will possibly be LeBron James. That's it. No other superstar. I mean, they could sign a guy like a Joe Johnson type player, in a couple of years to a max deal. A guy like that would sign a max deal with Cleveland. Some players go for the money. Some players already know they're going to get the contract wherever they play at, so they can choose their own city. And looking at it right now, the Cavaliers, I believe, will have over $20 million in cap this year with Jameson's contract off the books. Yes, we still have Luke Walton's terrible deal, but that's for one more season. We'll be able to dump him at the trade deadline or basically buy him out at the beginning of the season. He's not even worthy of a roster spot, and then his cap number will come up next year. The Cavaliers will have well over $30 million, or well around $30 million at next year's deadline, which will be huge. I mean, next offseason, when they'll be trying to compete again for a deep playoff spot and a deep title run. We'll have a lot of pick, a flux of young talent, and I think that's where you go. You don't want to build too early. That's the problem. That's why teams get stuck in mediocrity, because they go, we don't want to be a 20-win team for 2 more seasons. We get high pick. We want to win now and be an AC playoff team and have 35, 36 wins. It doesn't benefit you from doing it. You're never going to beat a team like Miami or Chicago doing that. That strategy just doesn't work. You're never going to get to a championship like it. You need to build slowly, or if you get lucky like Miami and be able to sign 2 superstar free agents at one time. That rarely happens in the NBA, almost never. So you have to take a slower approach to it. Yes, the fans don't always enjoy it, but that's what the NBA. The Cavaliers with LeBron James took a couple years ago. Year 1, they missed the playoffs. Year 2, they missed the playoffs barely. Year 3, they won 50 games. So right now, this was the end of year 1 of the rebuild. The year before didn't count. So this was the end of year 1 of the rebuild.
And you say it didn't. You say it didn't count. Obviously, the pain was there and the lousy record was there. But you're saying it didn't count because it was all thrown at them last second. They didn't have a chance to do anything.
They weren't even rebuilding at that point. They were just trying to restructure a roster to win some games.
It took a whole season to hit the reset button. It took a whole season to just press reset.
So, but I would say last offseason was very successful. You got Kyrie Irving and Tristan Thompson out of it. And the Cavaliers now look, and they have 2 really good young players, one potential superstar, another one a very good, player at the 4. As long as he develops offensively, he could be a very good player in some time. It could take 3 years, though. And you're holding a pick right now where if it's just set to go what it is, the Cavaliers will be picking 3. They'll be able to land another very talented player in this draft. And they have tons of cap room. I still tend to think that, if they take Beal over Kid Gilchrist at number 2, I'm saying this right now, they're paving the way for LeBron to come back. I still think so. Yahoo wrote another article about it the other day.
Oh, man.
I tend to think a lot of people in the business.
You keep bringing this up. You just keep bringing it up.
People I talk to all the time, I know people in his circle. I know from agents I've talked to, a lot of people say he just made the wrong decision. He knows that. And if he doesn't win a title in Miami this year, like I said all along, he's not going to win one there. Last year was their year to win it. They didn't win it. They should have won it. This year, the Spurs in Oklahoma City are better than the Mavericks were last year. I'll tell you that right now. And Miami's not any better than they were a year ago.
And you say if they pick the right people, then they're going to have the right complementary pieces to surround LeBron.
I don't even think at that point it's surrounding LeBron James with his talent. I think they also made a good point is that, before they tried to build around LeBron James, now you're trying to put all these pieces together. You're not trying to build around one single player, because if that player leaves in free agency, you're essentially done. That was what happened. The Cavaliers brought in 11 complementary players to LeBron James, all that fit his needs, what we needed in Cleveland. They're not doing that anymore. They're not, if they do re-sign LeBron, it's not going to be to build around him. It's going to have a superstar, so if he ever walks away or he gets injured, the Cavaliers will still be a competitive team. I still tend to think that he's coming back someday within the next 2 years, I tend to think. But, I could be wrong. I just don't think I am.
Well, you've brought it up on more than one occasion, and you talk to other people on a daily basis in the NBA with your role being an NBA scout. You're hearing it. You keep bringing it back to us, and it just keeps me, I don't know, if I'm gulping, taking a deep sigh, shaking my head in befuddlement. I don't even know what emotions I have at this point, but every time you bring that up, I'm like, God, he said it again.
I can't help but bring it up because you watch the way the Cavs are building. If they neglect the small forward position this year again, and they do it next year, you obviously know they're going for something bigger. And that's how I'm looking at it right now. Even Brian Windhorst thinks he's going to return. A lot of the major writers think he's going to return who are close, who have inside sources. A lot of executives think he's going to return. He's just not happy in Miami. He doesn't like Pat Riley the way he's ruling down there with the iron fist. Basically, LeBron went in there thinking, he was going to be surrounded with talent with a bunch of older veterans on minimum deals who were going to provide him with tons of talent around him. They just haven't. It's the big three. They don't even have a fourth and fifth player. Giannis Haslam's had a terrible year. Joel Anthony's been terrible. Eddie Curry's been terrible. Norris Cole started off the year hot. He's been terrible ever since. Mario Chalmers is mediocre at best. Their roster is the big three and nothing else. That's the problem. It's taking a lot of work for them to win games.
Well, compare it to the Cavs roster. How would you compare what Miami has down there around LeBron to some of the various playoff teams when the Cavs had the best record in the league? How would you compare?
The Cavaliers have a lot of complementary pieces. If you look at the team, the year they won 61 games 2 years ago, they had Shaquille O'Neal, who when healthy, he was playing very well. He was putting up, I believe it was, 13 and 10 a game, 14 and 10 or something like that.
Yeah, it was somewhere around 10 and 10 with. Yeah, sure.
He wasn't a superstar center anymore, but he was still putting up good numbers, and he was still a force defensively.
Solid.
Varejao was that high motor player that they needed at the 4 who was doing really well. They brought in Jamison, but the problem was the injury to Shaq, and he and Jamison never played together up until the first round of the playoffs. And you could clearly tell something was wrong because they were never in the rotation together. So, that had something to do with it. But Delonte West was a very valuable guy off the bench. Mo Williams was decent. They had a lot of decent players surrounding LeBron. And that was the thing. That was the difference. You don't necessarily need another superstar to play with. But now if LeBron were to come back, he has that superstar in Kyrie Irving, the point guard he never had. He never played with a legitimate number one. The Cavaliers, in LeBron's 7 years, never had a legitimate point guard. Mo Williams is more of a 2 than he is a 1.
Yeah.
And, it's showing that with the Clippers. He's a 6th man down there having a great year playing the 2. So I look at it and I say, if LeBron James is leaving again in 2 years with Miami, which he probably will, unless they manage to reel off a couple of titles, that's the way I see him staying down there, but I just don't see that happening. As he can look at it and he goes, Kyrie Irving's in Cleveland now. He's going to be a superstar, and this is 2 years down the road from now. If Kyrie Irving develops properly, I still think he has a chance to be much better than, not much, but better than Chris Paul. He's a better shooter, and he had a way better rookie year than Paul did.
Something about Chris Paul I'm sorry, I was just going to say something about Chris Paul has been bothering me. Just watching his facial expressions and watching some of the boneheaded plays. Yeah, he won that game in overtime, but something about Chris Paul just is really rubbing me the wrong way. Maybe it's his body language. It's something that's not tangible, but there's something about Chris Paul that just. Am I alone in this, or do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I don't have any concerns with Chris Paul, but the thing is, another thing you have to look at is Irving is also 3 inches taller than Chris Paul, has a better drive to the basket than Chris Paul ever did. Paul's a better passer than him and always will be. But Irving has that mix of Derrick Rose / Chris Paul in him, where he's not as good as either player, but he has a mix of each of their games,
right.
Which, he's a better shooter than Rose, but Rose has a better drive to the basket. Kyrie Irving will be somewhere between one of those two players. I think he has the potential to be better than Rose someday. But I think Rose is a better defender. But overall, though, they all mix and match pretty well. He has portions of each of their games. And I think Byron Scott does a great job with point guards. I think Tristan Thompson is going to develop nicely. I really do. He came along at the end of the year. He looked pretty good for someone who was very, very raw. And then, they're going to have a top 6 pick this year, which they're going to land another talented player. And even if they bring back LeBron in 2 years, they'll still have tons of cap room, even if they were signed into a max deal. So that's the biggest thing you have to look at there is, especially if they land Anthony Davis this year, they'll have a lot of guys clamoring to come to Cleveland because you'll look at it and you say, look, they have a 20-year-old superstar and a 19-year-old superstar in that roster and a bunch of picks to build around. If I want to win a championship, this is maybe where I go. It's starting. The Stars realize the big market thing didn't work out too well. Look at Miami. If Miami doesn't win this year, that's a failure down there. The New York Knicks has been a miserable failure for Amari and Carmelo. And I think, the Stars aren't, I think Darren Williams leaves this summer for Dallas. That's another big market player, who, the Nets thought they could attract for a big market. He might leave for Dallas. If he leaves for Dallas this offseason, the Brooklyn Nets are going to be bad for the next 5 to 10 years. They won't even be competitive.
But they'll have those cool black and white jerseys.
Oh yeah, real cool.
Real cool. Yeah, I know. I can even see what Jay-Z was going for, but they missed it. I can totally get the idea of like.
I mean, put a shade of blue in there or something.
I get like the gangster 1930s era. I totally get the vibe they're going for, but it's swing and a miss. It's an air ball. Oh,
terrible! I haven't met one person who's enjoyed their logo. I have friends from New Jersey and in New York who I talk to all the time. And they said, oh, so how about that Nets logo? And I was like, how about it? What do you think of it? They go, horrible.
Compare it to.
Yeah, I haven't met one person who liked it.
Compare it to the Cavaliers uniforms in the 90s with the.
Which one, the block letters or the paint stain? I actually personally was a big fan of the paint stain uniforms for the mid '90s. I love those uniforms.
Those light blue. Those light blue. With the
I love those uniforms. The ones I didn't like, the ones I really didn't like, were the ones that they wore in the late '90s, early 2000s when they were, with the block CAVS on them. That were just plain. There was no logo on them at all. It just said Cavs. I love the paint stained jerseys of the mid '90s. Though those were my favorite uniforms. Those were some of my favorite uniforms. I love them.
Well, I'll tell you the ones I like. I always like the wine and gold, like going way back to Richfield Coliseum, like.
Oh, that's when the Cavaliers used to wear those a couple of years ago.
Oh, those are cool.
Days. I absolutely love those. That's the one thing that upset me about the Cavs now. That's the one thing I loved during the LeBron era. They were wearing throwbacks, it seemed like, almost every game. They would wear, the regular uniforms. It seemed like half the season. Half the season would be throwback uniforms. I love the orange jerseys. They'd wear at home sometimes. Right. I love the old wine and gold, the classic one. And now they don't wear the throwbacks anymore. That's the one thing that disappoints me about the Cavs now. I love the throwback uniforms.
I feel my wife watches those design shows, and I feel like it's Tim Gunn now on one of these design shows. Make it work, talking uniforms. What is the worst Browns jersey, and what is your favorite Browns jersey?
Well, the one I can't stand anymore, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy, is the all-white uniform. I cannot stand that anymore.
Wait, why would I think you're crazy? I'm so tired of seeing that. I hate the all-white uniform.
After watching 16 games of it last year, I couldn't, it was hard to watch.
It was a whiteout. It was a whitewash.
My favorite will always be my favorite, are the brown jerseys and orange pants. I love those uniforms. Or just the brown jerseys and the white pants. I love those, too.
Yeah, the brown and orange, they got to get back to that.
Jerseys.
They got to get back to that.
Well, we haven't worn those since the Butch Davis era. That was the one thing I loved about Butch. Where, I remember I was at the first game where they wore the orange jerseys. It was against the Texans in '02. I still remember going to that game. They broke out the orange jerseys for that game. I thought that was fantastic. I really liked those. They were a little too orange, but they were still cool. I love the brown jerseys and the orange pants that they broke out on Monday Night Football against the Rams back in '04. Those were my absolute favorite. I love when they would wear those, and just even the road uniforms, the white jerseys and the orange pants.
Well, I think the orange and the orange and the orange. Yeah, it's a little orange. It's very cool. A couple of tweaks, and I still like it. But I've told people before, where else are you going to find a sport primarily played with your hands that's called football, where a team called the Browns, main color is orange?
Another uniform I really like too are the throwbacks they wore a few years ago. With the numbers on the side of the helmet.
Yeah.
And just the white stripe going down the helmet. There's no brown on it, and the stripes on the sleeves are a little short. Those are just a classic uniform with the brown jerseys and the white pants. I absolutely love those. Those were some of my favorites too.
Absolutely.
They were just clean-looking uniforms.
We're talking with NBA scout and Cleveland Browns, Indians, and Cavs fan, Zak Baris. Zach, I think we're just going to forego our commercials here. That's the beautiful part of what we're doing is, when you're the engineer, the producer, and the proprietor of the site, you get to run it how you want, and sometimes I want commercials, and sometimes I don't. So I think we're going to skip them now. We were supposed to talk about Birdman. I know we bounced over to uniforms and got into football real quick, but I want to come back to you. I'm just hearing a little bit about this story, Birdman, over in Denver. What is going on there? Have you heard anything?
I don't even know what to say. We've talked about it. I talked about it yesterday with some coworkers. I think it's just shocking. I don't know full details of it. I don't want to speculate on anything, but the police raided his home apparently on child pornography charges and web charges. I really don't know what happened there. I hope to God it's not true. But,
I mean, it could be something as easy as flirting with somebody online who's pretending they're someone that they're not, or it could be really disgusting stuff. I have no idea either.
But I mean, like I said, I really hope it's nothing big. I mean, because it's just, that guy's had a lot on his plate to begin with. He's probably would surprise me the least out of any player in the league. This is the guy who was kicked out of the league for numerous years for heroin and crack and cocaine possession. He tested positive actually for all three of those drugs. It would not surprise me with him. I know in college, I went to the University of Arizona. He was dating a freshman at the University of Arizona when I was a junior down there. At the time, he was 28, 29 years old, dating an 18-year-old in college. I knew his girlfriend at the time. It was definitely awkward then.
Okay, then let's stay tuned. There's not too much you can say about something when you don't know the facts. It reminds me of...
That's the problem. There hasn't been any, facts that come out. They said the investigation could take weeks. He wasn't with the team last night, and I highly doubt he'll be with the team tomorrow night. One, it's just a danger for him to be out there. Someone might, try to take, do the vigilante justice and try to take it into their own hands, and throw something at him. It's just not safe for him to be at the game, nor should Denver even have him there. It's completely inappropriate for him to even be on the bench.
Well,
with what's going on right now.
All right. Well, we'll follow that and see what happens there. I mean, we can talk a little bit about somebody else who had a really, really difficult pass. Josh Hamilton just knocked 4 home runs out of the park in the same game. I mean, he's a guy that struggled with a lot of different problems himself. How are you viewing the early baseball season, either from a Cleveland Indians perspective or just look at the league in general, and we can come back to the Tribe?
I have to say I'm just impressed with the league in general. I mean, it's not... it's nice to see the Indians in first place, to see the high payroll Tigers sitting there in second. Their pitching staff isn't performing well. The Indians aren't doing anything particularly well right now. The bullpen's been shoddy. The offense, has sputtered. Guys like Casey Kotchman aren't hitting. Brantley's finally starting to turn around. He had 4 hits last night. Kipnis is playing well. I love what the Indians are doing. They're just stringing together runs at a time. Some nights they look awful, and I go, this team, I don't even know how they're going to win 70 games this year. And then you look at them other nights and you go, this looks like a playoff baseball team.
Right.
It's just, last year, I think if they'd been healthy, I think they would have won well over 90 games. They won 80 games, and at one point in the season, we were missing 7 of our 9 starters in the starting lineup, which it was very hard to compete. But I'm glad they got off to a hot start last year. Luckily, they're playing well again this year after a 1-4 start. They're 18-13, I believe. So they've been playing good baseball too. They've been playing like 666 baseball after the first 5 games. And, I'm impressed. I have to say, Jack Hanahan, ride him as long as he's hot, and when he starts to cool down again, bring up Chisenhall. It'll be nice. I'd like, Johnny Damon, he's been nice to have in the lineup. He hasn't been hitting particularly well. He's had some big hits, some timely hits. And then going back to looking at other teams, the Minnesota Twins could finish with one of the worst records in league history this year. I don't even see them winning 60 games. They have tons of holes. I'm not even going to waste time talking about them. It's fun to look at the Baltimore Orioles. The team finally might be on the rise. Matt Wieters is having a fantastic year. I don't think the Orioles are going to make the playoffs. I think their division's still too strong with the Yankees and the Rays. But the Yankees, like I said, just had a blow with Mariano Rivera, the greatest closer of all time. He's out for the year.
That was crazy.
But Robertson and Soriano can take the load in the back of the bullpen. They should be all right. Plus, New York has ammo to make a trade if they have to, and they can bring in a big contract. So they shouldn't be too worried. Boston, I think, is a major problem. Josh Beckett misses a start last week due to injury, and then what do you know? He's on the golf course the next day. And then he got shelled last night by the Indians. He pitched 2 1/3 innings, giving up 7 runs. I think Boston's clubhouse is just a mess. I think they're a complete disaster right now. I don't even know what to say about them. They have tons of injuries right now. Ellsbury's hurt. Carl Crawford's injured. But they have way more problems just on top of that.
Well, his comment saying, "Well, what I do on my off day is my own time." I totally respect that in one regard. You just go out and do your job, and really, it's nobody's business what you're into in the other side.
But when you're injured and you can't make your start, and
you're
getting paid $17 million a year to go throw a baseball, you should be doing whatever you can to heal up and take time and improve your game. You're being paid for a reason.
Now, if he had a
that's the one thing.
If he had a specialist that said, look, we need you to loosen up XYZ muscle, and if you played a round of golf, it'll actually get you some of that rotation back. If that were part of the prescribed treatment, okay, that makes sense. But he just seems to have a really weird attitude about it.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the point where he doesn't care anymore. He's already got this World Series ring. It just seems like he doesn't care anymore. He's gotten his rings. It is what it is. And, he seems like one of those guys. It's like, you're paid to go to work. That's the one thing I don't like about Major League Baseball and the NBA. I don't like the guaranteed contracts. I like the NFL. If you sign a guy to a $55 million deal and he doesn't perform after year one, you can cut him.
Albert Hainsworth?
Yeah, you can. I mean, well, he still has $50 million guaranteed or $60 million guaranteed.
True.
But that's the thing is you still have the ability to cut him and not pay him the rest of his contract. That's what I don't like about baseball because if the Angels made a very dumb signing sending Pujols to a 10-year deal, sending a 32-year-old to a 10-year deal. He'll probably be washed up. He might be washed up now with the way he's been playing. I still think he'll turn around at least. I just can't see him going from last year doing what he did last year to having this kind of year. The full year. I mean, I'm sure he'll turn it on sometime. If he doesn't, it'll go down as not even being close to being the worst contract in baseball history.
Ooh, the worst in baseball history.
There's been some bad contracts, but that would by far be the worst.
Well, I think he'll turn it around too. Yeah, he just hit his first home run.
I'd be shocked if he did.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, he's been the cornerstone on my fantasy baseball team this year and last year. So I followed him even closer than a lot of players, and I have no doubt he's going to turn it around, but it's definitely in his head at this point. I don't care if you went from National League to American League. It's not that different. You're still just swinging a bat at a ball. It's kind of the same game.
He always performed well in interleague play. He did well in the World Series last year against American League pitching. I think he'll be fine. I think it's just a transition. He's going from a city that absolutely loved him. It's kind of the LeBron James thing.
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
LeBron performed so poorly at the beginning of last season. Because he just, he wasn't used to the crowd. It's just a change. You're going from a place you've been comfortable with your entire career to just leaving and going to try to find greener pastures, and it just doesn't work.
Well, do you think the Indians are going to work this year? Do you think they're going to have another fizzle out like they did last year? Do you think they're going to find a way to stay competitive throughout the entire season?
If they stay healthy, I think they can stay competitive. Because if you look at it right now, they've gotten very little production from their 1 and 2 starters in Ubaldo Jimenez and Justin Masterson. Masterson was brilliant last year. He was great. If Ubaldo had a great start last outing, if Ubaldo can turn it on and keep the ERA in the mid-3s or the low 3s, and Masterson can start doing what he did last year, and the Indians stay healthy, I think they'll be a force to be reckoned with because I think the rotation's been performing well.
Is Fausto going to come back at some point this year?
He doesn't even, from what I see right now, he doesn't have his visa yet. So I don't know if he's coming back anytime soon. He still doesn't have a visa. He can't get into the United States, so he can't even start pitching.
Such a weird
they
story.
put him in extended spring training at first. He can't get in. So right now it's a major problem, but luckily the Indians' rotation seems to be holding up fine at the moment. Yeah. And if the rotation keeps performing well, I mean, Derek Lowe has been phenomenal for the Indians.
Okay.
We took a guy who had an ERA in the high 5s last year in a pitcher's park in the National League in Atlanta. To doing what he's doing this year. The Indians are great with these reclamation projects.
Kevin Millwood.
Yeah. Carl Pavano. They've done a great job with these, with the reclamation project. And Derek Lowe has been another fantastic trade. He's getting paid $5 million a year. He's having an amazing year. He's winning games. He's pitching. He's gotten back. He's not getting up fly balls like he was last year. He's been a strict ground ball pitcher, and he's not getting the strikeouts. It doesn't matter though. But as long as you can get ground ball outs, that's why Masterson was so successful last year. And that's why Lowe's having such a great year this year. He hasn't even let up. I don't even think he's at. I think all of his starts this year have been quality starts. If he does that for a number 5 starter to give you quality starts each time in and out, you're going to win almost every single game in that spot of the rotation, which is huge. And he's been able to give the bullpen rest. Pastano's been performing well. Tony Sipp's worrying me. Nick Hagedorn has been fantastic in the back of the bullpen. He needs to stay up this time. If they send him down, I'm going to go nuts. He's the guy that needs to stay up. Dan Wheeler should be gone. He's terrible. And I think the addition of Fausto Carmona will be a big, he could even be a big addition in the bullpen if they don't need him in the rotation. As long as he's not closing, remember how well he did as a setup.
Oh, yeah, he was horrible in the bullpen. That's right.
He was great as a setup man. He was fantastic, and then they moved him to closer, and he fell apart.
A bad closer, right?
But I mean, if you can put him back in the bullpen, he can be like he was a few years ago. You know, as a setup guy, you know, the Indians suddenly have one of the best bullpens in the league again. You know, but like I said, we might not even see him until July or August. He was supposed to have the visa issue resolved a month ago. You know, we're sitting here, we're in the middle of May now. He still hasn't even pitched yet. You know, I don't know what the deal is with him. And it's going to be hard to say. I mean, he might not. We realistically might not even see him in the majors this year.
I remember his.
You know, if he doesn't.
I remember his agent's name, Bean Longfellow, but I forget his fake name. What is it, like Roberto Hernandez or something?
It's Roberto Hernandez. I forgot Roberto Heredia Hernandez or something.
I love the agent's name, Bean Longfellow. What an awesome name for a baseball player with a fake name.
It doesn't sound like a legit. It just sounds so shady.
It sounds like a fake agent name on top of and Fausto. Who picked the fake name? I mean, that's such a unique fake name.
What he did is he took stuff. He basically paid. He's been paying off a family for years in the Dominican Republic to buy this guy Fausto Carmona's name from him. So let's say he's been giving the family $50,000 a year.
I am
for the past
McLovin.
6 years. You know, so he bought a guy's identity off of him. You know, they essentially traded identities. So he's been Fausto Carmona, and I think what happened was, as he got busted renewing his visa, I don't know if it was the other guy came forward because he wasn't being paid enough money, or what it was, but you know, he got busted, and it is what it is. You know, I always thought he looked young. I mean, I guess he really is 32. He doesn't look 32 years old though.
Well, I've met the McLovin from the movies where he has the fake name, and it just, if you pick a fake name, a one-word name like McLovin, and you have an agent named Bean Longfellow, and you pick a fake name called Fausto that you've never heard of before, I love it. It's such a great classic Cleveland weird story. But moving off of baseball real quick, because we're about ready to wrap up the show here, I want to get in some Browns. Talk about classic Browns, classic Cleveland story. Phil Taylor, you heard the news where he tore his pectoral muscle.
It's a real bad hit to the Browns.
Terrible.
This year. I mean, luckily they took John Hughes in the third round. You know,
very luckily.
Who can hopefully step in right away and
have to.
You know, defensive tackle. But let's hope this is a 4-month injury, because if Phil Taylor, if it's a 4-month injury, he can come back by September. You know, realistically, he'll probably miss the first 6 weeks of the season. I think you'll see him back by week 7. He was fantastic last year for the Browns. He did a great job.
Yeah.
He was a great player for the Browns. I really like Phil Taylor. You know, the defensive line, I think Frosty Rucker will be a nice addition on defensive end this year, getting rid of Jamie Mitchell. He was terrible. You know, like I said, if the Browns defense performs like it did last year, which hopefully it does, I'm not saying it will, but if it can perform like it did last year, and the Browns are able to move the ball on offense slightly, they should have no problem winning 8 games this year. If Trent Richardson is what he's supposed to be, the offensive line is better than a year ago, which it should be. They have no reason not to be.
Right.
And Brandon Weeden is just better than Colt McCoy, you know, which shouldn't be that difficult. You know, putting up more than, you know, averaging more than a touchdown a game, he's better than Colt McCoy. So if that happens, if that falls into place, if Weeden's mediocre, and Trent Richardson performs up to his abilities, and Mitchell Schwartz does a nice job at right tackle, the Browns should win at least 8 games. I'm not saying they will, but they should. They're not as bad as they were a year ago. Last year they were a terrible football team.
The lack of the offseason really hurt them. I mean, you could tell it the whole time.
I mean, McCoy didn't have time to learn the playbook. I think Shermer was overwhelmed. I think adding an offensive coordinator and Brad Childress will be a big addition.
Very big.
And I also think that, like I said, last year the Browns played the majority of the season without a legitimate running back. You know, we signed Ogbenai off the Texans practice squad. Montario Hardesty was constantly injured. He constantly fumbled. Don't forget, Trent Richardson hasn't. I don't even know if Trent Richardson lost a fumble in college. I'm almost positive. I think he had one fumble and then it was recovered by Alabama. You know, this is a guy who doesn't fumble the ball. You know, he can run it and pound it. He's better than catching out of the backfield, like better than Peyton Hillis. He does everything better than Peyton Hillis did. He's stronger. He's faster. You know, and he's an incredible pass blocker too, which I think will help Weeden out.
Hopefully he's consistent and not crazy as well, because that's what Peyton Hillis gave us.
Well, remember what Peyton Hillis was able to do out of the backfield a couple of years ago? He gave Colt McCoy a nice little scapegoat, you know, out of the backfield, and Peyton Hillis had huge numbers receiving that year, 2 years ago, and McCoy looked really good when Hillis was healthy. And I think the same could go for this year. Brandon Whedon, apparently today he looked really good in camp. I know it's a rookie mini camp, but apparently even the writers are all saying he threw zip on his footballs, unlike Colt McCoy. He's throwing rockets in there, and it's a good sign. And Richardson apparently looked good too. I think the Browns could be a very interesting team this year. I think they could surprise people in a good way and a bad way. If they're 2-14, it won't surprise anyone. If they're 10-6, I wouldn't be shocked either. Like I said, if the offense can put up a fair amount of points this year, they're going to win some football games.
And I'm on record for saying I would have rather had Colt McCoy have Julio Jones and Trent Richardson and an off-season and an offensive coordinator and see what he can do. I've seen Trent Dilfer win a Super Bowl.
If you can give me Bill Taylor, Brandon Whedon, Greg Little, and I'm trying to think who else we got out of it. We got one other player in that deal out of it. I would easily take that over just having Julio Jones, because Colt McCoy would have struggled. Julio Jones would have not put up those numbers last year in Cleveland, I can guarantee you. Colt McCoy couldn't get the ball further downfield than 7-8 yards last year. Julio Jones is a big-time deep threat. McCoy couldn't get him the football. I believe Brandon Whedon can. I mean, it bothers me that Brandon Whedon's already 28 years old as a rookie, but if he performs, it doesn't matter how old he is. It really doesn't. If Brandon Whedon is successful, I don't really care about the age anymore. I just want to win football games. That's what matters. I trust Mike Holmgren bringing in a guy in the first round. I mean, this is the first quarterback he's ever taken in the first round in his 40 years of being a coach, or being an assistant coach, or general manager.
That's an incredible stat. Team president. That is an incredible stat when you put it that way, because he's had a lot of good players come in.
Remember that. Brett Favre wasn't a first-round pick. Matt Hasselbeck wasn't a first-round pick. When he was with the Niners, they traded for Steve Young. And so you have to look at that, and Mike Holmgren obviously felt the urgency to win now. That means that Whedon is the guy to win now. If you didn't feel that way, there are 5 franchise quarterbacks sitting in next year's draft, that have the possibility to be stars. And if he really wanted to, I don't think Holmgren wants to lose this year. I really don't. I think they're really hoping for Whedon to be the guy. They protected him with Richardson and Mitchell Schwartz. Like I said, I think the receivers will be better alone. There were some guys that were wide open last year. McCoy could never get them the ball. If Whedon can get them the ball, then next year you go looking at adding pieces in free agency. If the Browns win 8 games this year, you can legitimately add a few pieces in free agency that'll make the team that much better. And I think that's what the Browns are waiting for. I think the Browns don't want to add a piece in free agency until the time is right. It's the same model the Cavaliers are going for, the same model, structure model, what they're going for. It's better to be bad for a few years, because you're not going to be amazing after 1 year. It's like the Washington Redskins aren't suddenly going to be a 12-win team this year by going out like they do every year and adding tons of pieces in free agency and neglecting the draft every year. It isn't a successful model in the NFL. You can't neglect the draft. The Browns have drafted very well in Heckert's 2 years now. Well, this is his 3rd year. I don't know how the draft is shaped out this year. We'll see it when we see it. But so far, his first 2 drafts were incredibly successful. And I really hope this year is the same thing.
Well,
and if it is, I think the Browns will take a big leap forward, because they actually added playmakers.
What do you expect out of Trent Richardson this season in our last minute here?
I expect big numbers. I expect 1,200 yards and a guy who can put up at least 10 touchdowns. I'm expecting big numbers out of Trent Richardson. I think the offensive line will be better, and I just think the offense in general will be better. They have a full season to prepare. You don't have to worry about him holding out of camp. We have a new quarterback who I think will be a better fit for the system. They said his footwork was good at, was very good today under center, which he didn't play under center in college. I just think, overall, I don't think Whedon can be worse than McCoy. I'm telling you that right now. Mitchell Schwartz was the best right tackle in the draft. I think they filled a lot of pieces accordingly, and I just think this team will be a lot better, and I think they have a full year to transition into this offense now. And Brad Childress, they have a better coaching staff than they did a year ago.
Now, I'm on record. I saw McCoy do a couple of good things, and I haven't completely written him off yet. Yes, there were some bad games. Yes, there were some things that he could have been better on. But, I mean, when a team is cutting their 3rd-string receiver in the middle of the season, when you just dump Robisky.
Well, he was terrible, though. He was terrible.
But the whole team was terrible, from the running back across the board, and the lack of coaching, the lack of the offseason. I just wish they would have given McCoy a chance instead of bringing in an old guy, not even a rookie that can sit for a year or 2. This is an old guy. He's going to be 29 this season. So
I think McCoy's dad sealed his fate for him. I think Holt can blame his dad for what happened. Brad McCoy made, you don't insult the team who's writing your son a paycheck. If you work at a restaurant and call your boss a jerk, if your dad walks in, let's say you're a server at a restaurant, your dad walks in and goes, your boss is a jerk, tells him to his face, most likely your son's going to be fired from the job. It's going to be anywhere. Bosses don't want to hear that. And, Brad McCoy sealed his son's fate when he called out the Browns for the concussion, during that game. Against Pittsburgh. I think after that, you knew Colt McCoy was not going to be the starting quarterback for the Browns again.
Well, we'll see how the season's going to play out. It'll be interesting. It's too bad that Phil Taylor had to go down the way he did, but luckily, like you said, at least we drafted some good defensive tackles. We're out of time, Zach, so why don't you tell everybody one more time where they can find you online until we do this the next time?
You can find me on Twitter at @ZBaris, ZBARIS. Thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate it and look forward to being on in the future.
Hey, go Indians, go Browns, go Cavs, and maybe we can start talking some Buckeyes coming up soon here.
Thank you again.
All right, thank you, Zach. That was Zak Baris, a good friend of the show, a longtime contributor to what we've been doing here, and a lifetime Cleveland sports fan as well. We always enjoy talking with Zach. We're going to take a quick commercial break here in just a moment, and we're going to be back. We're going to transition out of sports, and we're going to go to our Agree to Disagree program. Yeah, we're going to talk, we're going to blend politics with spirituality and religion a little bit here, because I had a good friend with Lions of Liberty talking to me and said, this whole libertarian thing and against these big bankers, I've heard about this Prince of Peace named Jesus. And he was all about peace until he flipped the money changers table in the temple. Well, we're going to bring in a pastor who's going to tell us that story and kind of let's dig into this a little bit with a little bit of modern perspective. My name's Brian Engelman. This is the Unhappy Hour sports program, transitioning officially into Agree to Disagree. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Agree to Disagree program on the newamericanmedia.com.
Hi, Brian from the newamericanmedia.com. Last year I had this idea. I wanted to start a website of my own, not just a presence on Twitter, a presence on Facebook, and have a thing. I wanted a website. I wanted a home base for all of the ideas and things I'm interested in. I wanted live radio. I wanted to communicate with the globe. I was tired of being spoon-fed dogma by corporate interest and just, here, believe this, believe this. I said, no, I think there's something underneath the surface, but I didn't know how to do it. So I contacted Ted Distel of disteldesign.com. Ted walked us through the process of, okay, you want videos, you want to do quotes of the day, you want to have a spiritual section, you want to have a 1984 watch where government's intruding and private corporations are intruding into your privacy. Yeah, those are the things that I was interested in. Ted walked me through the process. We built thenewamericanmedia.com, and I encourage you to go online and take a look at our site. That's what he's capable of. Please, if you have an idea, go to disteldesign.com. That's DISTEL design.com.
Have you ever considered adopting a pet to be part of your family? Our animal companions can be just as close to us as our human companions. If you're considering adoption, please visit your local shelter and adopt a pet today. Shelter pets make the best pets.
Follow the newamericanmedia.com on Twitter at American_media_.
Hi, it's Brian from the newamericanmedia.com. I'm a sports fan. I was raised in Cleveland, spent 25 years in Ohio. I watched the drive, the fumble, the shot too. I watched Art Modell steal the Cleveland Browns and win a Super Bowl over in Baltimore. I watched a horrible coach named Bill Belichick go on to the Patriots and win Super Bowls over there. Hooray. I am a bitter sports fan. Let's not even talk about what happened with he who shall not be named who went to South Beach to take his talents there. Excuse me, I almost threw up in my mouth a little bit there. I am a sports fan who cares to talk about the things that matter to me. That is the Indians, the Cavs, the Browns, and the Buckeyes. But of course, I pay attention to national sports, and we discuss that on our show as well. That's why we have The Unhappy Hour every single Friday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific. Sit down, have a drink. It's the end of a long work week, and we can all get together and talk about the unhappy times that we've had as sports fans. We've all had them. We've had ups and downs, but as Cleveland fans, we only have downs. Join us.